Morning, dear friends. Welcome. Thank you for being here. Today we're studying the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time. Mesechet Shabbat, chapter 19, Kuf Lamed Gimel, 133a, soon 133b. We should probably point out the date. It's Wednesday, September 7th, the 11th of Elul. Yud Aleph Elul. Big times, big days. And we'll share the screen. As you may recall, we've been talking all about the intersection of Shabbos and circumcision. Yesterday, Yontif and circumcision. We know that Yontif, Mila Bizmana, pushes aside Yontif, not Mila Shaloi Bizmana. At the closing moments of our shir, we reviewed a series of different limudim. The limudim, as I shared with you yesterday, challenged me a bit. I unfortunately can't claim. I did a little scanning, and I didn't really find anything that helped me have a considerably deeper sense of what's going on.
Rabbi,
Suffice it to say that circumcision is a mitzvah that has a time, and I guess that would be the analog compared to a carbon that needs to be on that day. Mila is the carbon is on the day of Yontif, but a carbon that's not specifically set for that Yontif, with a variety of sources, it was pointed to the fact that if it's not for that day, it's deferred past that day, and the Gemara projects and applies the same sentiment as is found by a non-timely carbon to a non-timely bris. Different analysis, different readings of Sukkim. And I think we're going to leave it at that for now.
Rabbi,
Yes, Rabbi.
since I wasn't there yesterday, the obvious question, if we set aside Shabbos, why would there be a shaila about Yontif?
That's why we needed you to be here yesterday. But I'll ask you really fast. What is the difference between Shabbos and Yontif halachically? Any difference?
Whatever, Shabbos is more restricted.
Not whatever.
No, Shabbos is more restricted.
Rabbanan and Torah.
So your question is, even though Shabbos you cannot do an untimely bris, Yontif being more lenient, you want to be allowed to do an untimely bris, yeah?
Yes.
Because Yontif is more lenient. And so yesterday's Gemara, with the different readings, pointed to the fact that an untimely bris, although you might think that you would do it on Yontif, because that's actually a very good question. Someone else asked that question yesterday, so great minds think alike. But the gist of it is that a not timely bris, just you'll defer to after Yontif or after Shabbos. It doesn't have the urgency that would warrant doing it on Shabbos. The limudim were intricate, and again, I'm still struggling to appreciate the perfect, seamless comparison between Karbonis and Mila, but that is the gist.
Tell me if I'm wrong. Kvura, for instance, is doche Yontif, isn't it? On
No,
second day,
Kvura is
on
not
the second day. On
Kvura
the
is only
second
doche
day,
Yontif Sheni because the Chachamim.
on the second day.
Yeah, but not on the first day.
So is Mila doche second day Yontif?
That's an interesting question. I don't believe so, but that is an interesting question, and I have a feeling that it is discussed. No, let's hold on. Let's do one thing. Dr. Stalman, that's a good question. I like that. Bear with me. I'm looking to see if we connect the halacha sources here, but it doesn't look like we do. I mean, it's not really a halacha question as much as the Gemara's discussion is not the halacha. The Gemara's discussion is how do we know the halacha? All right, we'll have to revisit that. Mila b'Yontif, that's a good question. Yontif Sheni, probably not, because the point is once you're late, there's a whole lot less of a sense of urgency in the halachic conversation. Let us see. So now we're going to continue on to New Gemara. There are a number of topics that members of our shir asked if we might discuss down the line, and today I believe is one of those days we're going to discuss a number of the matters that we said we were holding off down the line, particularly because we're going to start a new Mishnah. So I'll make the introduction then. But the caveat is that bris is not one of my strong points, so we're going to learn the text. We'll have conversations, but it's possible that some of the intricate elements of it, the anatomy and the process, will not be well known to me, and so I just want to put that out there up front. We'll learn it together. But first, Klal Amar Rabbi Akiva. So you may recall many days ago, a few weeks ago, we started the Mishnah. We started chapter 19, and we read a Mishnah about bris, and we read two different opinions. If you are doicha Shabbos, if we push Shabbos aside for hechsher mitzvah, the things that facilitate the mitzvah, Rabbi Elazar says that Eliezer says you do push aside Shabbos. Rabbi Akiva says you do not. The more precise language of Rabbi Akiva was Klal Amar Rabbi Akiva Kol Malacha. Sure, let's get the exact language. So I'm not trying to. No, wrong time. Hold on. Well, here we'll read it in the English. I don't want to scroll back. We'll get totally lost. Any prohibited labor that can be done on Shabbos, on Erev Shabbos, doesn't override Shabbos, but a malacha that cannot be done on Erev Shabbos does override Shabbos. Essentially, so that was Rabbi Akiva says. So basically, we're not going to be doicha Shabbos unless you had no other possibility, no other opportunity. But we're not just going to allow you to willy-nilly be mechal Shabbos if you had advanced notice. And the good news is that every bris has at least an 8-day head start, or 7 days, if you want to say. Every bris, you get advanced notice. Now, who has advanced notice? I don't know. The parents have advanced notice. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Marav, Rabbi Yehuda Marav, halacha Rabbi Akiva. We follow Rabbi Akiva, not Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Elazar. Now we're going to compare and contrast the sentiment of being Mechal Shabbos or not being Mechal Shabbos. When you had opportunity to do so before Shabbos, we're gonna first discuss a little more in length, and then we're gonna compare it and contrast it to similar halachic context, similar but different. Similarly, we learned about Pesach, a similar sense. What do we read? Rabbi Akiva made the same assertion. Any malacha that a person could have done before Shabbos, does not push aside Shabbos. What's Gabi Pesach? Rashi says, anything like bringing the animal, making sure that it was fully primed. So our Gemara, just to clarify, is envisioning a scenario where Pesach is Matzah Shabbos. The first day of Pesach is Sunday. And so Erev Pesach is Shabbos. When do you do the Carbon Pesach? On Erev Shabbos. So Pesach, Carbon Pesach is Doiche Shabbos. We do administer the Carbon Pesach on Shabbos. The question is, what about if you procrastinated and didn't do certain things you could have done on Friday, on Erev Pesach? So Rabbi Akiva says you could have done it before Shabbos. No, we're not going to let you do it on Shabbos. However, Shechita, the actual shechting, you cannot do that on Erev Shabbos. It needs to be done on Shabbos. She efshel asay some Erev Shabbos, doiches a Shabbos. So very simple. You want to know a formula? We said you could be mechal Shabbos to do the mitzvah, but we only mean those things that are incredibly timely and it cannot be done in advance. And in this conversation, in this comment of Rabbi Akiva, we have a similar affirmation of Rabbi Yehuda Marav, halacha ki Rabbi Akiva, that the halacha follows the position of Rabbi Akiva. Tosfos has an interesting comment, which to really understand this Tosfos, you'd have to have some background in other places in the Gemara. I'm not really claiming to have that. I don't recall this kind of question, but likely it had been asked. So give me 1 second. I want to just briefly glance in this Tosfos. All right. A number of times in Gemara, there is a halachic dialogue about something that is only going to apply when the Beis Hamikdash is rebuilt and when Mashiach comes. And in those, the understanding is that in the Gemara's time, not like the Mishnah, the Gemara's time, the urgent, pressing matters to be discussed were things of relevance then. If it's something that's only going to become applicable when Mashiach comes, the Gemara will ask, why are you giving me a psak? Hilchasa l'mashicha. This is only relevant when Mashiach comes. And if I had to take a guess, why would the Gemara give a psak then? We'll wait for the Sanhedrin, because when Mashiach comes, we'll have a Sanhedrin. And so the Gemara doesn't need to give a psak about hilchasa l'mashicha. So Tosfos comments, although many times in Shas, many times in the Talmud, if the Gemara was talking about the Korban Pesach, they'll say hilchasa l'mashicha. Says no, here the Gemara doesn't ask that because nafkamina gabimila, it's related to the conversation about circumcision, as we see in our Gemara. Now, I have a question on this Tosfos, but I don't know if we have the resources to probe it further. The question that I have is that Korban Pesach is not necessarily only applicable when Mashiach comes. There are many deists, many opinions that say that Korban Pesach could be brought even without the Beis Hamikdash, only with having access to the Har HaBayis. So maybe Tosfos doesn't paskin that way.
That's what people do today. There are some that
So after the 6 Day War, when Israel had access to the Har HaBayis, there were poskim, including the Rebbe, who advised those who would heed their voice to leave Yerushalayim on Erev Pesach, so as not to trigger a to trigger an obligation to do the Korban Pesach, because ultimately they weren't going to be able to do it, or they didn't know how to do it, or whatever, or they weren't Patar, or whatever the question is.
I think what is it, the Teres Kohanim? I think they
Now,
actually,
what happened in the Rebbe's case, because I'm more familiar with the Rebbe than other poskim, happens to be, for a few years, the Rebbe advised the Hasidim in Yerushalayim, or maybe certain Hasidim in Yerushalayim, to leave the city so that they'd be rechoka and not have the potential challenge or conflict of doing Korban Pesach. At a certain point, tragically, it was clear that Israel gave over a full administration to the Har HaBayis of the Waf, and Jews could barely even access the Har HaBayis at all. And so the Rebbe said in a very disappointed way that unfortunately it's clear that we don't actually control the Har HaBayis, and there is no shaila that a person would not be possibly able to access the Har HaBayis, and therefore no one needs to leave Yerushalayim. That was the Rebbe's psak. It is possible,
Rabbi.
hold on. It is possible that there are others who yet maintain that you should leave the city. I don't know, but that's the little bit that I know. So the question is, and again, I have this question because I don't know enough about the sugya. Maybe Tosfos does not believe that you bring the Korban Pesach without the Beis Hamikdash, or maybe Tosfos, the notion of Jews having control of Yerushalayim was implausible. I don't know. Rebero?
Rabbi, maybe we need the halacha because the shaila would arrive. What could you prepare for Pesach?
What do you mean?
What could you do? You're preparing for Passover. What are you allowed to do before Shabbos? After Shabbos? It's not the sacrifice, but it represents the sacrifice. Maybe that's why we need halacha for today.
I hear you, but I don't think I don't think that would be so. I don't think there's any practice today that comes close to the Korban Pesach. There aren't practices today that would warrant being Mechal Shabbos. Korban Pesach would. Let's take a fast peek into the Rambam. Let's see if this is about his question of Chilul Shabbos. Oh, Rabbi Allen is on. Welcome, Rabbi Allen. Rabbi Allen, welcome back. We've missed you. We've actually dropped your name a few times. I don't know if you heard us, but Allen, welcome. Good to have you on. Rambam. Shchitas HaPesach Uzrikas Doma, slaughtering, sprinkling the blood, Michoy Krovov, the cleansing of its innards, the hektar chalavov, and burning its fats. Those that push aside Shabbos, as they are part of the essential elements of the Korban Pesach that cannot be done in advance. In the words of Rambam, She Efshel Asoysim Kaidim Shabbos, Shaharei Kavua Lo Yizman. These are items that have a set time, and if Erev Pesach is Shabbos, that's when you're going to do it. So if anyone could think back to the years where Erev Pesach was Shabbos in our recent past, it's a pretty chaotic day. You have to get rid of the chametz. It's a very interesting thing. Now, imagine, in addition to whatever we have to do, imagine that you actually have to bring a carbon Pesach. Imagine how
last year was that way.
Right. So imagine how complicated it would be if you had to bring a carbon Pesach. You had to get an Airbnb that was walking distance to the Har Bayis. You had to. It was crazy. Aval harkavasai, the havasai, michos l'tchum, carrying it from outside l'tchum, or prepping it and removing anything that might otherwise disqualify it. Einon doichen es haShabbos shay efshal hasois and kaidem haShabbos. You could do it before Shabbos. Now you'll ask me a question: why does the Rambam talk about this? Hilchas el Mashiach. So the answer is the Rambam. One of the special perks. One of the special things about the Rambam is the Rambam, does give a recap of all of Jewish practice, and he encompasses also temple law, the laws of what's going to happen when Mashiach comes. And that was actually one of the reasons why the Rebbe so strongly encouraged Hasidim and all Jews to study the Rambam, because he says if you want to have a well-rounded taste of all aspects of halacha, including those that are not relevant or applicable today, the only work you can really do that does that is the Rambam, because the Code of Jewish Law, for example, does not discuss the Beis Hamikdash or Mashiach comes, etc. All right, let's see. So, but anyway, so we have two very similar conversations. We have the conversation about a bris. If you could do it before Shabbos, you got to do it before Shabbos. If you can't, you can do it on Shabbos. And we have the Carbon Pesach with the same idea. So maybe we only need to list one of these discussions and impose and project to the other. Why does the Gemara need to elaborate both teachings? So the Gemara says, "Utsricha," we need to preserve in our records both conversations independently. Why? Let's see Rashi. Lemeimar bitarvayu halacha Rabbi Akiva d'machshirin loydachol. We need to twice point out that we actually follow the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, because there's something that sets Mila and Pesach apart. There's something unique about circumcision. There's something unique about Carbon Pesach that I wouldn't instinctively compare the two. Now, think with me for a moment. There's something very important that they actually do have in common. What is the big thing that Carbon Pesach and Mila have in common? Anyone know? Consequences. What's the consequence of failure to do the Carbon Pesach? Dr. Stam, I know you were muted, but it was on the tip of your tongue.
It was not on the tip of my tongue.
Correct. Karis is explicitly laid out in the psukim that describe Carbon Pesach, and it's explicitly laid out in the psukim that talk about Bris Milah. So there's something that they have in common. So it's not an implausible grouping. It's not crazy to suppose that we could project, compare, and impose halachic opinion, in fact, from one to the other. But ultimately, the Gemara says we cannot, because there are significant distinctions between the two. Let's see. Maybe I'd say Hassam, who the machshirim efshalasais miasmo. Maybe in the case of circumcision, that you can also do all of its machshirim before Shabbos. So maybe leidachu Shabbos, the lake of Karis. It wouldn't push aside Shabbos, because don't get confused by these words. You actually do get confused by these words. These are confusing words. Maybe I'll say that by Mila, I force you to do everything beforehand that you can, because even if you don't do the bris on Shabbos, the lake of Karis, there is no Karis. And now you're thinking, and I'm thinking, we're all screaming, what are you talking about? The rabbi just said and reminded us that the Torah says that if you don't get a circumcision, v'nichris, there is karis. And the Gemara says there's no karis. So this is such a big problem. Rashi right away responds. Karis, who gets karis? Let's read Rashi. The katan lav bar ein shemu. The child doesn't get karis. The avua lo mechayev karis. So at 8 days old, no one's getting karis. after the baby turns bar mitzvah, then there is kares. But until then, there is no kares. So failure to do a bris on the 8th day, although you certainly should not fail, there is no kares. Aval Pesach, take a kares, ein malitchin. Carbon Pesach, you miss the deadline, and boom, there is the potential for kares. So the urgency is greater by Pesach in a sense, or at least you might think there's a greater urgency. That's why we need to explicitly say the same halacha, because I wouldn't necessarily impose the facts of Pesach to Milah. But it also works the opposite way. If we would only know that by Pesach, the halacha is that you cannot do that which can be done Erev Shabbos on Shabbos. Carbon Pesach 1, there's no bris. By Milah, we have 13 references to the bris, telling us how important it is. So there's something that makes Milah seem more important. There's something that makes Pesach more important. And so all in all, we would not necessarily infer the facts of one to the other. And therefore, Rabbi Yehuda Marav has to tell us in both instances, we actually follow Rabbi Akiva. My dear friends, we've reached that moment. Mazel Tov. We finished the first Mishnah of Rabbi Elazar de Milah. So here we are, new Mishnah. Any comments or questions on the previous Gemara before we jump into a new one?
Can we drink a l'chaim?
I'm
I
sorry,
was drinking my iced coffee.
Can we drink? We can drink a.
You could
a
drink a
l'chaim,
coffee l'chaim.
but not a coffee.
Again, the big toast is when we finish a chapter, but we finish the mission. That's also a big milestone. We've been already 2.5 weeks or 3 weeks on this mission.
Rabbi,
Yes, Professor.
I have a question about the relative status of Mishnah and Baraita. That is, it seems that they have equal weight and equal importance. Like we can draw on a Baraita to discuss what a Mishnah is saying, and it seems that you cannot dismiss a Baraita because it contradicts a Mishnah, and we have to find the way to eliminate the contradiction. However, we see that a Mishnah deserves a very detailed and long and ordered discussion, one Mishnah after another. Meanwhile, Baraitas appear out of nowhere in the middle of discussion, and it seems that they don't really deserve such a detailed discussion. At least it frankly troubles me that during the Mishnah discussion, it can be interrupted, and out of nowhere, without any warning, there appears another Baraita, and we don't know how many Baraitot are there that could be relevant and why this one is used for applied to this discussion. That is, I see a great difference between treating Mishnayot and Baraitot.
Professor, I very much appreciate your question. It's actually funny that you're asking this now, because last night we had, after Yeshiva night, we had an impromptu we had an after party. And so we were discussing this very topic. You're asking, is the Mishnah and the Braita of equal weight? If it is, why don't the Braitas get the same treatment as the Mishnah? And so on. What's the story? Here, you muted yourself, so hold on, we don't hear you now.
Why we don't have a collection of Baratot similar to a collection of Mishnayot?
So there are collections of Braitot, but they didn't necessarily reach us today in an organized fashion. And the reason being that the Braitot, we should back up. There was an oral tradition floating around among the Jewish people for a very, very long time, from Mount Sinai. It's reasonable to assume that those oral traditions underwent various efforts to develop, organize, structure, etc. All oral. The Mishnah and the Brisa, apparently, at least generally speaking, it could be said, were culled from a big pool of these oral traditions. The Mishnahs were the traditions that were concise, that were organized, collected, sorted, edited to best convey the maximum amount of information with the least amount of words. And the Mishnah is intended to be a launching pad for dialogues, for conversations among the sages. And so from the time Rabbi Yehuda Nasi codifies the Mishnah becomes the source material that we discuss. However, the Mishnah is very shorthand and does not fully elaborate everything that there is to know. And so in the time of I think you know this, I'm just recapping and maybe this will help clarify things. And so therefore, concurrent to or right after the Mishnah, there were efforts to preserve, to record, to collect Braitot, which were extra Mishnaic texts from the same authors, but they didn't have exactly the same weight. They were more of resource material to help us understand the Mishnah but to provide additional halachic insight. And so the work of the Gemara is a work of those conversations being preserved and recorded on paper. And those conversations in their original format, which I'll add some more information in a sentence, were based around the Mishnahs. How did we get the Gemara as we have it? You might accuse me of somewhat oversimplifying things, but I think this is a fair explanation based on what I was taught and what I've read and researched. Since the time of the Mishnah, there was vast conversations. Usually the conversations would happen in different ways. Either they happened around a study session, but they also might have happened around a practical question. When there's a practical question, two different rabbis would say, okay, let's review the Mishnah, and then they would spar and debate and discuss, and then they would come to have an opinion. And in the study hall, when that opinion was determined, that might have then been further solidified into the memory or into the process. What happened is this process, this style of dialoguing based on the Mishnah continued for several hundred years. It's a period of time that we call the period of the Talmud, where the Talmud conversations were being developed, discussed, and preserved in one way or another. At a certain point, probably early on in that, there was biannual meetings called the Kala or the Yarche Kala. And these were a month-long assembly of a large number of Talmud scholars, Amoraim, where they would get together, not all of them, not all the time, not all the place, and not in every era, but there were these meetings where discussions and cross-pollination and sharing of ideas and probably a lot of vigorous debate took place. But what's most important for the Talmud is that Rav Ashi, who was the redactor, the editor, the primary author, if you had to put an author, or the editor-in-chief of the Talmud, lived a very long time, thank God, approximately, I think, 7. And so he was the Rosh Yeshiva and led these Kala processes for a very long time, many, many times. And every meeting, they would choose another Masechta. And so Rav Ashi uses those meetings to really collect and extract as much of these different traditions and begins to commit them to writing and organizes them they were already organized based on the Masechta, and that ends up becoming the bulk of the Talmud. And so the Talmud that we have, and again, I'm oversimplifying because there were a number of generations and tiers and editors, but primarily it would appear that much of what we have as the Talmud was the effort of Rav Ashi at these kalas to collect, record, organize these teachings. Those teachings were around the Mishnah, and therefore the text that we study is also around the Mishnah. However, in the course of those conversations, very frequently, they would access as a resource, or even sometimes to support and to fuel conversation and dialogue, the Braitot that were along the topics of the Mishnah. But they weren't studying the Braitot as a standalone text. They were woven in and considered a resource to the Mishnah discussion. This is how I understand it. It's a little bit of an oversimplification, but that I believe is why the Mishnah has a much more central position in the Gemara itself that we study. because that was the reality of the discussion. But of course, that reality also represents a priority and a greater weight to the Mishnah. And so if there would be a debate between a Mishnah and a Brisa, it's quite likely that the Mishnah would win the day. But most of the time, it's not that there's a contradiction between a Mishnah and a Brisa. The Brisa either is an elaboration of the Mishnah or preserving another take on the matter that wasn't recorded in the Mishnah for whatever reason. I don't know if I answered the question, but I hope it gave some clarity as to why the way the Gemara is structured, it's around the Mishnah, not around the Brisa, and why the Brisas are introduced. We are also certainly missing a lot of.
It is not really the issue of Baraita versus Mishnah. Just I wonder why it is so unstructured and unordered. That is, during those times, there should be an effort. This is what I thought, an effort to organize Baraitot in the same way as somebody organized Mishnayot, because they are pulled out quite unexpectedly, and sometimes, I'm just puzzled why they use this source rather than another source, and what else is there in store. They appear like, like a hair from the head of a magician.
So I think to us it appears, and that's a very interesting question. I think that to us, the Braita appears or seems to be pulled out of a hat. But it seems like in those days there were authoritative Braitot. But I think the thing about a Braisa is it might have not been universal. You might have had a series of Braitot that were preserved in one school of thought and they didn't reach the other. And so, but there was a certain amount of trust, I think, or authority for a person that was part of a legitimate tradition to say, we have a tradition of a Braita that says X. And these are extra, I call them extra Mishnaic texts from the sages of the Mishnah. It's almost, and so I think there were works then of preserving and recording the Braitot, but I think there were different traditions of the Braitot. The Braitot, I think, once were organized in a work somewhat like the Mishnah. So we talk about Rav Chia and was it Rav Chia and Rav Oishia, I think, who organized and had Braitot. So I think they had Braitot. We might not have the Braitot as they were, but I think there were people that had, and they had a Braitot. And I'll tell you one more thing just to confuse things further. In the Gemara, there are times that we'll talk about authoritative Braitot and less authoritative Braitot. And depending on who the tradition originated from, if it came from Rav Chia or Rav Oishia, they were trusted to have done a very vigorous and proper vetting. And so therefore we would take their brises with greater weight than if someone said, oh yeah, I heard from my teacher and we're not exactly sure where it came from, or it came from a less reputable source. So I think the problem is that the way we experience the Braitot, they are entirely from left field, kind of like, and maybe this is not a fair comparison, but when I try to read an academic article or in a journal, and the author is writing a certain subject, and all of a sudden out of left field, he drops other authorities in the field. And to me, it's left field because I'm not a student of that matter. But probably if you're a person whose entire attention is devoted to that field, the other authors or opinions that are introduced are probably less of a left field than to me, the uneducated reader. And so I think to all of us, as we study the Gemara, Braitot that were probably once much more familiar to the people that were originally having the dialogue now are from left field. And happens to be that the bulk of the Braitot that we know about that live to this day are the Braitot that are found in the Gemara. But I think that's, and one more thing to add is I think there are many other resources that were available to people at times past that we don't have. And conversely, there are certain resources that they didn't have that we now have again because of all the different libraries, the collections and publishing, but not so much from the time of the Talmud, more from the later generations. Professor, I'm sorry.
Does the Jerusalem Talmud uses Baraitot in the same way as the Babylonian Talmud, and are these the same Baraitot, or are they different?
You know what? I can't give you a well-educated and well-researched answer. I believe they do, but they had sometimes different traditions, because there was actually the Jerusalem Talmud really was the product of another academy that there was a lot of cross-pollination, but they had some of their own traditions. The format in general of the Jerusalem Talmud is a little less, it preserves less of the vigorous back and forth of the Babylonian Talmud, the Talmud that we study. And to just throw in one more line, even though I know you asked a question and I took that as an invitation to totally go out on my another rant, but the tragedy of the Jerusalem Talmud is that the Jerusalem Talmud was composed not in Jerusalem, it was composed in the Galilee in the north, and it was under Roman authority, and the Romans were more oppressive and dismantled and utterly destroyed or almost entirely destroyed the yeshivot of Israel a long time before and in middle of the process of preserving the Talmud. And so the Talmud Yerushalmi is a less edited and less perfected document because they didn't have a 50-year or 70-year period of a single rabbi that was able to sit and comfortably and confidently invite the sages every year. The Talmud Bavli, the Babylonian Talmud, was under Persian rule, and although the Persians were not exactly tzaddikim and different administrations had different treatments, but generally speaking, the Babylonian Talmud and the Jews of Iraq had a whole lot more of an easy and simple life, although not at all simple compared to our standards. And it's really that reason that the Talmud Bavli was able to be a whole lot more edited, although you might ask, how is this edited? And also to preserve and introduce a lot more of the dialogue. And obviously to the authors of the Talmud, there was a goal to preserve a lot of the dialogue, and not just to give us facts, but to allow us to kind of eavesdrop into the Talmud. I think the Talmud was an early attempt to create a tape recorder, a recording of a conversation. Now, they couldn't literally record it with a tape, but they just about preserved the whole lot of the back and forth, even though all we're, in a sense, we want to know the halacha, but we're gifted with opportunity to relive and to kind of listen into the conversation.
But because of the fact that the Braitot were not codified within the Mishnah, and so it became, I think, sort of an apocryphal addendum, and don't carry the same weight as the Mishnayos. And
this is true. They don't have the same weight as the Mishnah, but they carry the weight of. They carry great weight to the Gemara. But I think a lot of times, if you'll notice, the Brisa is clarifying, because what Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is, one of his main objectives is to shorten the text to be a manageable text so people could preserve it to memory. It's hard for us to imagine someone remembering all the Mishnah, but that it seems like, and based on reading the Gemara, you get people that know full Sidarim of the Mishnah by heart, and it was like the way we would access a hard drive on a computer. They would pull it up from memory. And so it had to be manageable. And so it's not that everything that didn't make it into the Mishnah was a rejected teaching. It just didn't have the format, the style, or the shorthand that the Mishnah needed to have. So it's very much respected as an authority, not the same weight as the Mishnah, but certainly when it's considered a clarifying and elaborating resource.
Rabbi.
Yeah. So again, just to recap, there probably was a book of or a book of Braitot. We don't have the book of Braitot. The Braitot probably would have been a more of a resource than the primary subject. So the shir was on the Mishnah, but you would frequently access the Brisa, probably akin to the way we'll access certain commentaries or certain other resources as we study the Talmud. Rebel, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Rabbi, in this completely different, take you off in a completely different, I didn't hear yesterday, but I'm surprised that in comparison of Korban Pesach and Milah, nobody brings up the Shaila of Pesach Sheni, that there is something that someone can do to correct.
But that wouldn't mitigate a person that was able to bring the Korban Pesach having cars. That would only be a person who was disqualified. Do me a favor. I think I want to start this Mishnah today, and I think you want to start this Mishnah too. I don't mean you as in Rebel, I mean you as in all of us. So let's start the Mishnah. Dr. Hammer, hold on tight. Buckle your seatbelt. Because this Mishnah is going to end up being a little more graphic and addressing some of the things that we were asking about. Oisin called Sarche Mila. One is permitted to do all of the bris related items, the essential bris essentials. What are they? I'm going to use Rabbi Steinsaltz more than usual here. Moihalim, we circumcise. Uparim, we uncover the skin. So apparently, and again, I'm not a mohel, and even since I was a kid, I could never really get too close to the circumcision. It didn't. But apparently, there are actually two layers of skin that are being manipulated or dealt with at a bris. There is a foreskin that is cut off. That's called mila, moihalim. But then there is another membrane, very thin membrane, which is pulled down in the circumcision process and exposing the flesh that is underneath it. Umaitzitzim, one literally sucks or extracts blood from the wound. V'noisnim aleha is polanis, and we place that in a bandage, v'chamon, and cumin, which was understood to have healing properties. Do me a favor, that we could spend a long time on each of these, and we will, but let's go through the Mishnah, and then we'll allow ourselves a chance to unpack this. Rashi. Oisim called Sarche Mila b'Shabbos. Afal gav d'le'il nami katani. Although we already, in the previous Mishnah, say, Oisim called Sarche Mila, Hasam tanila agav grara, the mili d'tinik aval hacha eker. This is really just setting things up. So the word here, Oisim called Sarche Mila, is just a setup for moil and poem, etc. Even though we already know this essential. Is that Tosfos? Oops. I'm sorry. Let's read Rashi. It's going to make more sense. Moihalim. Chotech eta orla. You cut off the foreskin. Uparim. Es ha'or hamechase roish hagid. This is a layer of skin that covers the head of the organ. Umaitzitzim. Es hadam. One sucks away the blood. Va'afal gav dehi asiyas chabura. Although pulling the blood out of the injury is part of wounding or drawing blood and prohibited, but here it is necessary for medical reasons, as we will discuss and debate.
So Rabbi, I'm going to open up a little.
No. Do me a favor. If you're going to
wait.
Yeah, we're
Okay,
going to parse
wait.
all of these later, so I just want to go through the Mishnah first. So I'm not trying to avoid any fun
no
conversation. So unless it's a translation question, let's kick it down just a few minutes. Ispolanis is a tachboshet. This is a bandage. So yeah, so these are the things that need to be done. You need to cut off the foreskin. You need to peel back the dupria. The blood does need to be removed from the side of the wound, and there needs to be a bandage. Those are all essential. And therefore, they are done on Shabbos. However, that doesn't mean that you cannot be prepared for these needs. So what happens in Shabbos? What happens if you didn't grind up the salve that you're putting on the wound? So doctors and folks that are knowledgeable of contemporary medicine, brace yourself. You chew up the salve, break it down with your teeth, and then you just put it on the site of the wound. Can't be anything problematic about that, right? Why don't you use a knife or a pestle or whatever? Because you do it in the most different way as possible and put it in your mouth. The imlay taraf, yayin v'shaman me'er Shabbos. If you didn't mix up the wine and the oil, that's going to also be placed on the wound. So you apply it, but not in a mixture, one after the other. First the wine, then the oil. Rashi. This was the common practice then. And it is to heal. Shema'arvim, v'torfim, v'kara. Mix it together in a dish. Yain, v'shem, and yachai, kederach shetorfim. beitzim bekara. And the process is very much similar to the way you beat an egg. You beat together the wine and the oil. Or today, I would say it's kind of like what you do in a dressing. So you need to apply these medicines to the wound. You can grind up the salve with your teeth. Not the salve. You can grind up the powder. You can apply the liquids, but not mix it. But what can't be done? Again, it's a long mission, and we'll be parsing every one of these things. There's a lot of interesting questions, and to consider what is relevant today, what's not, which things are essential, which things were medical. On Shabbos, we don't fashion a pouch that was used as a bandage. Smarted, you could wrap around a rag. Rashi explains, what is this chalak? Ke'ain, kiss, dacho kaya oisim. They used to make a little sheath that was somewhat tight. Umalbishim es roish hagid ad hatar, and they would put it on the site of the circumcision. The koishim sham kidei shalayachzar or lechases hagid. Basically, they'd apply a bandage that would apply pressure to keep whatever skin was pulled down to avoid it springing back up or healing in a way that would recover the. Again, I'm not well versed in all the medical intricacy. I think is it the corona is the top. I think that's what we might call it. But anyways, they would affix it in a way to optimize the form and the appearance of the circumcision. But you cannot make it on Shabbos. Imla hiskin mer of Shabbos. Now, let's say you forgot to bring the bandage that's designed for the Mila. If you forgot to bring it to the place, to the shoulder, to the house where the bris is going to be, you could wrap it on one's finger and then carry it. Even if it's from one chatzar to the other. Rashi, derech malbush, you should wear it as a garment. So you're transporting it in a way that's very different than in the week. So I just want to, let's run through the Mishnah. And we can discuss a little more. Remember, the Gemara is going to break this all down. I'm going to explain it all. So again, the general rule is that things that can't be done before Shabbos but are essential for the bris can be done. And the Mishnah gives us a number of steps. 1, 2, 3, 4. Cutting off the foreskin, pulling down the membrane, mitzitza, and wound care. Those can be done on Shabbos. They must be done on Shabbos if the bris is on time. However, prepare as much as possible. One forgot to prepare the salve. Don't do it in a regular way. You could do it with your teeth. If you forgot to mix the two liquids that go into on the wound, don't mix them. You could apply them one at a time. And similarly, the sheath or the pouch, the bandage that's placed over there shouldn't be fashioned on Shabbos. You could, however, wrap some kind of shmata. And if you left it at home, you can wear it on your finger to carry from one place to another. That is the Mishnah, a number of halachas. Of course, there's a very interesting, before we go into all the definitions, there's a very big problem in this Mishnah. The problem is less of a problem in the Sefaria. Actually, no, it is. Come back to the first line over here. Oisim kol sorche mila. Some manuscripts don't have this word b'Shabbos on Shabbos. It's clear that, or it's presumable that the Mishnah in Masechet Shabbos that's talking about all these steps. It's very strongly probable that this is a Mishnah that's explicitly talking about Shabbos. Apparently, the Rambam's version of this text did not have the word b'Shabbos. Again, we'll look at right now. I don't have for you the halachic nafkamina, but it explains why Rashi in the first Rashi. No, I'm sorry, not Rashi. Tosfos tells us and quotes with us the word b'Shabbos to give us the proper gears.
Rabbi, if it wasn't Shabbos, we don't need this at all.
Right, so that's why that's why the version would be shver, and that's why there's a discussion about what exactly the nafkamina would be. Here you have the Rosh, for example, who quotes this Gemara. Lemaisa is talking about Shabbos, but he doesn't actually have the word Shabbos in his text. Let's go. And again, this might be a little bit of a getting ahead of ourselves. So we have. No, that's not what I want to show. I want to show you the other day here. Here. Again, what we're going to see, we're getting ahead of ourselves, but I just want to give us a little bit of a text of the Shulchan Aruch. Mila docha yamtiv v'Shabbos bizmana. So in the bottom line of our Gemara, Mila pushes aside Yamtiv and Shabbos if it's a timely circumcision. But if it's not timely, it doesn't push aside. Even a bris that happens on the 8th day on Shabbos, it really only pushes aside, and when it's only permitted to do the essentials of the circumcision, Priyom Etzitza, but not the rest. I'm just debating how the best way to discuss all the different steps. I think we just have to. So I know the big question here, which I don't have an answer for, but I just want to bring it up because we asked to bring it up, is the big question. Bizman Hazeh, a very vigorous debate. I think in Teaneck there's a general consensus, and in general there's somewhat of a divide between the Hasidic and very, very strong traditionalist poskim and some other poskim, and it has to do with the question of mitzitza. So from the beginning of time of Jewish circumcision, it appears that there were 4 steps to the bris. There was cutting off the arla, pulling down an additional membrane of skin again, and then they would extract blood from the site, and then they would do wound care. And what's very questionable or controversial today is the question of the mitzitza part, the removing of the blood. I think the main reason why it's a question today, besides for the potential for infection, which is of course discussed, but the question is more basic than that. Was the mitzitza an essential step in bris, or was it a step just like bandaging, which was understood based on medicine of the time? So there are many poskim, and correct me if I'm wrong. It's not like I specifically studied Hilchas, the minig of Teaneck, but I believe I've seen in different journals from that kind of world expressing reservation, hesitation, or not doing mitzitza. Or there are those who use a tube to create a vacuum to extract some blood.
Yeah,
but
you
not
use a pipette. You use a pipette that actually does. You have the active
pipette, right?
mitzitza.
Okay, so I'm not a doctor, so I said tube.
Without you have the active mitzitza without contact.
Without
Because
contact,
it
yes.
doesn't say specifically mitzitza pipette.
So there's 2 questions. The question number 1 is mitzitza essential at all? And then if it is, does the pen need to be involved? Or could you use how do I say it? Pipette?
Pipette.
Yes, a pipette.
And so a pipette extracts some of the blood, accomplishing the technical steps, but not causing contact. So that's the discussion. So generally, you'll ask the Hasidic Moalim, they'll be very forceful that this is part of the continuous essential steps of Mila. And then you'll ask, I think some not all, but some of the Litvische Poiskim, I think Rabbi Dr. Tendler, I think has the son of Moshe has some teshuvas about this. So anyways, I just wanted to bring it up because I didn't want to railroad past it without addressing this.
Don't worry, we would have brought it up.
No, I know we're going to bring it up. So I just wanted to make sure that we
Brought it up the other day.
we give it. So I told you that we'll address it. So I wanted
we'll
to.
get to it.
So I don't have a lot of hyper specialized expertise on the matter, but the survey that I shared with you, I think, is generally the very, very basic overview. And then there's another question, which is assume that a moil does do mitzitza b'peh, they would have to test to make sure that they don't carry any kind of thing that would be transmittable to the son or the baby. There were some terrible headlines about a baby that caught herpes from the moil, and I don't know if the baby died or the baby, but there's a lot
There's also
of
the question of AIDS.
AIDS.
AIDS. possibly, I mean.
Who, from the
depending-
moil to the baby or from the baby to the
Yeah,
moil?
no, from the mall to the baby. And theoretically, even vice versa.
Right. So if you're saying a baby, if a mother, again, I'm admittedly out of my specialty, so I'm talking a lot. But you're saying that if a baby has let's say the mother had AIDS, the baby could catch AIDS, and then the moil could catch it orally. Is that
Well, theoretically, if he has an open wound, I mean, you need the
Well-
blood to blood.
Well, I think everyone could agree that it's a bad practice to smear someone else's blood come in contact at all, and certainly not to apply it on open wounds. But you're saying the baby has an open wound. So I don't know enough about AIDS either. Is the virus in the mouth and the saliva that would then be conveyed? But anyways, if a moil has AIDS, he should not be doing, he should be not doing bris. I could say that with a lot of confidence.
You could add COVID to the list of dangers today.
Is it? I don't know. I mean, COVID is a danger. I don't know if COVID is a particular issue at a bris. Dr. Stalma, you're muted.
Yeah, COVID would be mouth to mouth. This is not mouth to mouth.
Right. And also, again, if the moil has any symptoms, or the baby has any symptoms, or the family has any symptoms, they should consult medical care before giving a baby a bris, because if they're in the onset of any kind of infection, you don't want them to have a traumatic event that they're going to need to heal from. And anyway, so I think there's a lot that we can find absolute consensus on the matter. But again, to this day, there is a raging debate. I know, for example, I remember in Crown Heights, there was a mall called Rabbi Heller. Big mall, very popular actually in Manhattan by a lot of it. And so he is a big mall, and I think he's an activist. Again, these aren't like personal feelings. These are based on, earlier poskim, but I know he's an activist in the defense of Mitzitza B'Peh, and then there are others that are activists in the, making sure that it's extremely safe. And it's an important, fluid, ongoing discussion in the Jewish world. It's probably, if we had to choose like a list of like the top 10 contentious modern debates among the Orthodox world, I think this Mitzitza B'Peh question would rank probably in the top 10. Eruv would probably also rank in the top 10. And
You have a story in yesterday's Jerusalem Post about a botched bris.
yeah, we opened with that actually in the pre-recorded segment.
If you have it, it's okay, I guess. The not using Mitzitza B'Peh, but the avid, I don't think anybody has an issue with it.
Yes, I think there's some olim that will respect. Again, I'm speaking fairish without a lot of authority, so it could be I'll come back to you tomorrow and say I chatted with the moil and here's what I got wrong. So I want to be very frank about.
Okay, can someone come and say, well, you need to do a toughest done because you didn't do Mitzitza B'Peh?
I don't. No. I don't think so. No, I don't.
So that's what I'm saying. But
I think some moyalim will listen to the parents.
If it was done that way, I don't think it's an issue.
Yes, I think some moyalim that do it will respect the parents' request or whatever. But anyway, so that, my dear friends, wow, what a way to end. This concludes another day, another journey through the Talmud. Again, the primary objective of our discussion here is to understand the laws of bris on Shabbos. The Mishnah brings up the 4 steps, and there we have it. Tomorrow, Be'ezer Hashem will begin the Mishnah, an analysis of the Mishnah, which is going to start off with a basic question of what if the moil didn't do the full job? Can they fix it up on Shabbos? And anyways, I think we need to recruit a urologist for this Gemara. Anyone have a friend that's a urologist or a moil that we could bring on? Anyways, my dear friends, let's dedicate. Well, tonight is the yard site. Yitzchak ben Moshe. Yitzchak ben Moshe, our dear Barbara's father.
I know a pediatric urologist who does the Orthodox, I also know an oral surgeon, but he probably does who does a lot of Brisum here in TNX. But he probably does Mitzitza B'Peh because he's an oral surgeon. I'm just kidding.
Look, as long as he doesn't do the cut with his teeth. All righty, dear friends, have a wonderful day. Yasher Koyach. Hope everyone feels good and does well, and we should have a fantastic day and only good news for Klal Yisrael. Thank you.